Hi, everybody. Shannon Petrovich with Therapist Talks. A lot of people ask me what I think about the trend of adult children going no contact with their parents. I think this is a really sad thing. And yes, sometimes it's necessary, but so often it's a really unhealthy thing to do. And there are so many other things that you can do before you decide to do that. So let's dig in and talk about this. Why is this happening so often? Well, it has a lot to do with all of the weaponization of the terms narcissistic or toxic. And yes, there are certainly toxic parents and toxic relationships, and we don't want to engage in those in the same ways that we had before. But that doesn't mean we have to just look at that, decide it's toxic, and cut it off. In fact, when we do that, we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to recognize what happened, how it happened, what part of it is affecting us internally, and how we can grow and change so that we don't carry those toxic traits forward with us. And what I mean by that is not that you are being toxic if that's a toxic relationship, but we tend to take on roles. Bessel van der Kolk, in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, calls them templates. So if I grew up in a family where there was a lot of toxic traits, and I take on the role of sort of placater and caregiver and things like that, then I'm carrying those roles with me into my life, into my other relationships. And that becomes toxic to me, even if I have no contact with that previous relationship with a parent or whoever. So it's extremely important that we recognize what happened and our role and what we took on as a result of that, so that we can learn to set boundaries, we can learn to show up fully in our relationships, and oftentimes growing within that parent relationship will actually help us to grow in all our relationships. So if we can learn to address that parent directly, talk about what happened, talk about what we're feeling about it, what we think about it, what we want, what we need. When we do that work with that parent, which is really hard and really difficult and can be super challenging and scary and all of that stuff. But when we do that with the source of where that came from, that's powerful. And then we have that strength. We're not as nearly as afraid of everybody else in our lives as we were that parent. So then it's easy to deal with the person at work who's toxic, or the person the other people in our lives who are toxic. That stuff's easy compared to facing those early relationships. So cutting them off prematurely can often mean that you deny yourself the opportunity of growing into that place of being powerful enough to address that person who originally hurt your feelings. So that is my primary reason that I encourage people not to just cut them off. The secondary reason is that when we learn to take care of ourselves and then see what happens, we do a much better job in our relationships moving forward, seeing what part's mine and what part's the other person's. So when I can show up with my whole thoughts, feelings, wants, and needs on board, I can show up with boundaries, I can show up with the space and time that I need in a relationship, then if somebody is encroaching on my boundaries, I recognize it. If I never do that boundary work, if I just cut people off, then I don't learn that about myself. Like, again, what did I internalize as a youngster that I'm still carrying with me and acting out in other relationships? So don't cut it off before you've done the work, doing the internal work, doing the external work with how to be in and navigate relationships, because all relationships are difficult and challenging because we are not the same. We are going to have different attitudes, we're going to have different thoughts and feelings, we're going to have different wants and needs. So when we learn how to address those directly, we carry those strengths forward in all our relationships. If we just cut and run, we have no skills. And that's not a good way to live, because then anytime we face toxicity, what if it's in the work environment? We don't have those skills. Then we want to cut and run from that too. So it's not very healthy just to learn cut and run as our only strategy. So if somebody is encouraging you to do that, seek further and look into it further. So what can you do to create healthier patterns with a parent? Well, in boundary setting, we need to look at it sort of in gradations. So we don't set a boundary all the way to the top right away. You know, if you think about setting boundaries with anybody, you're going to first kind of give them an indication that you're not very happy with the way they're talking to you or acting towards you. Then you want to set a firmer boundary if they don't hear that, a firmer boundary, and then, you know, cutting it off. But we can also have shorter cutoffs, like, okay, I'm going to hang up the phone right now because I don't like the way you're talking to me. Or, okay, I'm going to head home. This has been kind of stressful. Why don't we take a break? Or let's talk about this again another time, because it doesn't seem like we're finding solutions. It seems like we're just in conflict. So oftentimes those shorter, more immediate but short-term cutoffs are healthier, because you're establishing that you're no longer going to let yourself be treated like a doormat. You're no longer going to just allow whatever to be going on in this relationship, but you're also not just severing for good forever and ever, amen. So you're cutting it off and then giving that person some time to think about it and process that, and hopefully the next time you have an interaction, they'll remember and recognize that you're not going to let that happen again. So if you have to do that over and over and over, then obviously you may be seeing that this person is not going to respect your boundaries over time, and that this relationship doesn't necessarily have any credibility moving forward. But if you've done the work to establish your own boundaries, to express yourself and to say no and to hang up and to walk away, then you know that you've given it every shot. You know you've given it every chance. And even when you sever, you can say, you know, if someday you see things differently and we can talk about this differently in more healthy ways, I'd be willing to hear from you again. But right now I need to take a break. So that would be even healthier. If you have to cut that person off, that would be a healthier way than I never want to hear from you again, which is a lot of times what parents hear from an adult child who's going no contact. So those are healthier ways to handle that. Those are healthier short-term solutions. And then if you do even have to do a longer-term solution, allowing that comeback if the person begins to see things differently. So remember, noticing your own thoughts, feelings, wants, and needs, noticing where you might be placating, where you might be peacekeeping or people-pleasing, recognizing that you have a right to set boundaries, and setting those boundaries earlier and in appropriate amount, and then even taking timeouts so that you get your point across. I'm not going to be spoken to that way, but allowing yourself to keep working at it until you know you can't work at it any longer, and still leaving that opening that if someday they see it differently or want to get together with you with a therapist present, that you'd be open to that. Again, cutting people off, cutting your parents off, going no contact forever and ever, amen, that's not healthy for you, okay? And you may hear on a lot of social media, that's what's healthy for you. I disagree. Learning boundaries, learning to express yourself, learning to set those timeouts and come back and collaboratively figure it out, that's healthier for you. You will find your strength. You will find your assertiveness and ability to express yourself and stand your ground and hear the other person in a collaborative and coordinated way. So take good care of yourselves. If you have other topics you'd like me to address, drop a comment below. And take care. I'll talk to you again soon.